This is Ask Joe 221. After one false start with my mic muted, we're doing this right this time. See, you just roll with it. You make a bunch of stupid mistakes and you roll with it. Welcome to the podcast. My name's Joe Gilder from Home Studio Corner, like the t-shirt. If you're listening on the podcast, hi, thanks for listening. We do video versions of these on YouTube. You can go check out. Or if you're really adventurous, you should come attend live on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Central Time. Maybe coordinate your lunch break, or if you're British, hang out after dinner and come see us. Come ask your questions, hang out. There's a good group of people that hang out in the live chat. It's a ton of fun if you're into music and audio and, you know, me. So let's talk a little bit today about, in this Valentine's Day edition. I have nothing related to Valentine's at all, but other than the intro. But yes, Jim Edgar, you can show up in the studio. Just come walk on right in. That would actually be really fun. Probably slightly distracting, but I can make that work. So today I want to talk about something that's just been on my mind a little bit, and it's come up in several different scenarios of different interactions with people, both friends of mine and customers. You may have seen I launched a business course, kind of testing the waters to see kind of how that would do, if people would like it, if it would connect with them. And a handful of people, some of them here on the call, I believe, Don's here. Several people have gone through the course, and we're just finishing up. And one of the big themes that I see, and it's not surprising, and I've talked about it before, so this is probably repetitious. Repetitious? This is probably repetitious. Repetitious. How many times can you say repetitious to some of you? But it's something that I think we all need to talk about a lot, and that's this idea of fear, right? There's so much fear around what we do, which is making music in a studio. It starts out with this, you get into it, you buy the equipment, and there's this fear that you just don't know what you're doing, and that you'll never figure it out, which is legit. Like, there's a lot to figure out, and there's a lot of seeming mysteries to uncover as you try to learn how to navigate this world of doing home recording. You had this dream of releasing music and maybe helping other people record music, and then it turns into this seemingly this it starts off as a seemingly simple thing, and then it grows into this thing this giant jigsaw puzzle, and you're having to put the pieces together. So you start to get some momentum, you start to learn how to do a few things well, and you're moving along, and then it's like out of nowhere, this fear comes up that says, okay, now that you know some of the technical stuff of how to pull this thing off, now I'm going to hit you with some crippling doubt, or maybe it comes in the form of procrastination, or always studying but never actually doing, or any one of those things. So I just want to talk about that a little bit. I was talking to a friend this morning who is in a different world, but he's got a lot of anxiety around really diving in and committing to this thing that he's done. He's built this thing, and it's doing pretty well, or it has the potential to do well, but he kind of keeps holding back and keeps just dipping his toe in the water, and if it doesn't work perfectly, he pulls back out and says, I can't do this. And it's just interesting in talking to him and kind of navigating that a little bit with him. I see a lot of that in myself, and I see a lot of it in, maybe you see a lot of that in yourself as well. This idea that I've got to get it right, and I can make no mistakes, and every step must be intentional, or every step must be flawless in order for me to keep doing this. And as soon as a few failures come along, you start to realize that maybe you weren't meant to do this, and the doubts just come flying in. I just want to, if no one's ever told you this before, and you've never heard me say this before, that's normal. Completely normal. Like, I got a baseball here. I don't even know why I wasn't even very good at baseball, but I like to throw it around. Do you think that if your favorite baseball player strikes out, that he is no longer fit to play baseball? No. Like, I don't know the stats, but they strike out like, I don't know, don't they strike out like 80% of the time or something crazy? Maybe it's not that many, but they strike out more than they hit, I think, or at least half and half. And couldn't that be a metaphor for real life? You're going to try something in the studio and it's not going to work. You're going to try a new way to get clients and it's not going to work. You're going to put all your eggs into this one basket and put a bunch of time and effort and even money into this thing that you think's a no-brainer, and it's not going to work. And it's so easy, and I'm preaching to myself as much as anyone, to see the things that don't work and then to only see the things that don't work and to not see all the other things that are happening in music and in your life that are good and are things to celebrate and be thankful for, when all you do is focus on the things that aren't working. I mean, you gotta address the things that aren't working. Doesn't do any of us any good to put our heads in the sand, but at the same time, it doesn't. You got to address the stuff, but at the same time, to only focus entirely on it doesn't help anything either, because then you forget that there's lots of great things that you've got going on. So maybe you're early in the game and you don't do a lot of things well yet when it comes to recording and audio. You can take solace in the fact that an idiot like me can figure it out and make halfway decent sounding music. If I can do it, you can too. And that's the case. I mean, come to one of the live streams here on Tuesdays and you'll encounter a bunch of other people who aren't much different from you. A lot of folks who are musicians and got into audio and then developed a passion for it, and now they're slogging through making a little more music here and a little more music there and making a bunch of bad sounding stuff and then a few good sounding things and then lather, rinse, and repeat. It's a fun, exciting process. And I would hate for you or me to miss out because we take ourselves out of the game for fear of striking out. Chris Janton, who is one of the most informative members that I have, he's just on the ball all the time. He says, excellent hitters get about 30%. And Bill kind of says the same thing. You get about if you get a hit 3 out of 10 times, you go to the Hall of Fame. 3 out of 10. You realize in high school, if you make a 30 on a test, you're out of here, right? Like, that's horrible and that's a failure. And in baseball / real life, you get a hit 3 out of 10 times. It doesn't even mean a home run, right? That counts as a hit, but the majority of those are just regular old base hits. Maybe a double here. Strikeout, 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 strikeout. Home run. Strikeout, strikeout, strikeout. Base hit. Like, that's the cadence of life. It doesn't mean you go around like Eeyore and you're just in constant state of, oh, I'm just going to strike out again. That's not the point at all. It's this idea of having an expectation that's realistic, and then also a hope that, well, the hit has got to come. If I keep doing the right things and I keep focusing on the right things and I keep improving, then I'm going to start to get more hits more frequently, but I'm never going to stop striking out. The only way I can prevent striking out is if I never walk up to the plate again. It's funny how it's turned into a baseball analogy, and it actually works really well. That wasn't my intention. I just grabbed this baseball that I found at the park. So that's my thought for today. Think of yourself as a baseball player in the studio. If you haven't struck out recently, you probably haven't put yourself in the game yet. If you have struck out, and maybe you've got a string of strikeouts, and you're feeling a little bummed out, and you're not sure what to do with yourself, you're probably doing it right. So just keep doing that, and you're going to see improvements, I promise, okay? Ran out of time. Boom. All right, sorry if that was a little scatterbrained and all over the place. I feel a little scatterbrained and all over the place. I'm drinking tea like the British folk told me to, but I'm still a little crazy. So now's the good part, right? This is the best part where we're going to answer your questions. So if you're here live, you need to be here live. That's where I get the questions. And if you're here with me, go ahead and start typing your questions into the box. And I'll try to get to as many as I can. If I don't get to your question, I'm sorry. Some people accuse me of having favorites, and that may be true. People who show up more regularly and I have a relationship with, I'm going to see their names, like just physiologically, their names are going to pop out to me more. So there may be some truth to that. But I do try to get to as many questions as I can. It's just sometimes they come through so fast I can't get to them. So bear with me, and if I don't answer your question in a few minutes, feel free to ask it again. Or if you asked one way early in the stream, come back and ask it again. Bartimus Prime, you had one about my controller that I didn't understand, so maybe you can ask that again. Jorge says, any tips for mixing low end? How do you handle low end? Low end is the thing, right? That's once you can get a handle on the top end. We're pretty good at making things not too harsh, but the low end is just this. You can turn it up 6 dB on the kick drum and it still sounds kind of good. And you turn it down 10 dB and it still kind of works. It's this weird place of how do we find that balance? References are a great place to start. If you play your mix and you switch to somebody else's and immediately you notice that your mix has way more low end than theirs, then you probably need to dial that back a little bit. The good news is in a typical rock and roll or country or folk, typical arrangement, the low end really just consists, if you're mixing it well, consists of kick drum and bass guitar. So you could literally run both of those to a single fader and just bring that up or down as late in the mix as you want to kind of balance that out. I've started putting a Neve style EQ on my mix bus using the fat channel in Studio One and using the shelf. There's a low shelf, and a high shelf. Using those to kind of smooth out my low end and high end towards the end of the mix when I feel like I'm really close, but it has just a little too much low end or not quite enough. So I'll take that shelf up or down a little bit as needed. But yeah, it's one of those things. There's references and then there's personal preference. So I tend to like a lot of bass and a lot of low end in my mixes, but that may not be what you like, and that's just preference and style. So I've had mixes before where I feel like my low end feels really good, but then I go listen to 2 or 3 references and they all have less low end than mine. So I could either go turn my low end down, but I kept looking and I found a few references of a few albums that I love that had just as much low end as mine, which gave me permission to say, okay, I'm not out of the realm of possibility of what's doable. I'm just in kind of the more low end side of the spectrum, but it still all works pretty well. Man, a lot of questions coming in. I love it. Let's see. Tom says, I'm getting used to Studio One. Question is why my main volume is so much louder when I'm using Cubase with my Studio Live 3 board than Studio One. Faders are at the same spot. I have no idea. Maybe Cubase has something on the output that you forgot about. Yeah, otherwise I don't know. But it seems like one of those made-up problems that doesn't actually have any bearing in the real world. No one's going to know that your Cubase is louder, so just move the fader and get back to work. I understand it's curious, and it might be nice to figure it out, but really, big picture, what does it matter? Just make good music and make sure it's not too loud in the final bounced-down version. Julian says, find yourself automating the master fader much, bumping the last chorus or something like that. I do some automation like that, but not on the master fader. I think it works a little bit better to automate the subgroups that I have. So if you've seen any of my mix videos, I tend to run through 8 or so subgroups: drums, bass, guitars, vocals, keys, background vocals. And a lot of times taking a few of those, maybe just the instruments or maybe all of them, and just bumping them up for a chorus can give that desired effect without just bumping up the overall volume. So what happens is you're bumping up what's feeding your bus compressor. So if you have a mixed bus compressor on your master fader, you're hitting it a little harder. So if you bump everything up 2 dB, not that much, just half a dB, you got more volume going in, but then the compressor is probably going to lock down a little bit more, which is going to feel like it has more energy to me. So that's how I like to do it. Nothing wrong with automating the master fader either. I know guys who do that, and some guys who do that in mastering, which is interesting, which you can't do in Studio One. You can't automate stuff, which I wish you could. Maybe they'll add that eventually. How would you prefer recording a 40-ish choir? Live, the whole choir at once in a studio setting, or separately each voice one after the other? Questions from Arnd. It depends on what kind of, if it's a choir project, I would probably just record the whole choir. Assuming they sound good, blah, blah, blah. And then as far as how to set it up, I'd get a pair of mics out far away from the choir to get the overall sound, and then maybe just a handful of spot mics. Maybe if they're lined up where like soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and you can kind of get a mic on each section, that might be helpful. You don't want lots of mics up front because of the phase issues start to become problematic. That's probably what I would do. One-on-one, one at a time, is more the approach you'd take for more a straight-up a cappella recording. Where, I always forget the name of that a cappella group, the one that's on the radio, but that style, then I would go one at a time, and that gets a lot more involved. But if it's a more traditional, like here's my church choir, they're singing a few excerpts from Handel's Messiah or something, that to me seems more like a simple job. You can just record it, and if they sound good in the performance, then it's going to sound good on the recording, and if they don't, they don't. You just kind of have to run the gambit on that. Have you listened to Andrew Peterson's latest EP? I've not listened to it yet. Do I see a Roswell mic? Yes, this is the Roswell Mini K47 that I've been using a lot lately. And my SM7 is dead or buzzy, so I've been using it for the podcast as well. I like it a lot. Where's a good place to find clients for paid mixing? So paid mixing work, not recording work, that's not Facebook. You know, I mean, you can summarize that question, where's a good place to find clients? And answer that question, because whether it's online or not, it's in relationships. That's it. The clients that I get through Home Studio Corner, I put in tons of work creating value in this resource that has attracted people to my brand. And then a small percentage of those connect with me and they like what I'm doing. And they say, hey, I want to hire you to master my album. That's how the process has worked for me. Does everyone need to do it that way? No, but you do need to find a way to create value for people. This is one thought that I've been thinking about a lot lately. How can you create value for people that aren't going to pay you anything? I think there's way too many people. I'm not saying you're doing this, but just in general, there are way too many people who are constantly thinking, I'm not going to do anything if I don't see the payoff. And that is such a small way to live. You're not going to see much success that way. If you're always looking out for, I don't want to do that unless I know I'm getting paid, then you don't have the generosity that you need to put out good vibes into the world, put out a lot of value, be a helpful person to people regardless of if they give you money. And what ends up happening is you get a lot of people who want to give you money. It's that idea behind The Go Giver. If you haven't read that book, I highly recommend reading it. Be a generous person with your time and with your effort, and really invest in people. And that doesn't mean you have to give away everything and never get paid for your work, but it does mean you focus a good chunk of your time on simply giving. I hate the term giving back, but giving to the community that you want to serve, and then in turn you become a trusted person in that realm. So if that means in a local community, it's really investing in the local artists. So if there's a songwriter in town who's really great and has a lot of potential, maybe you really just become a fan and go to a lot of their shows and offer to help set things up or offer to help record something for free just to kind of let them come check out your studio. Those types of things. And then eventually that may down the road, 18 months from now, not 2 weeks from now, but a year and a half from now might lead to them saying, hey, you've been awesome. I'd love to hire you to mix my next record. Another more obvious practical suggestion would be, if you just want to mix, then find people who just want to record and partner with them. So if they can get the recording clients and you can mix, then y'all can both kind of offer your services as a whole package to people. I will warn you that while it's totally legitimate to want to just do mixing, you may not have the luxury of doing that early on. Because if you haven't done a lot of mixing and you don't have a lot of connections with musicians, then who's going to hire you? You don't have any experience. So you may need to go out and record people and then mix those projects. You may need to take on types of work you don't want to do in the short term to eventually build up the rapport and the demand for your services that allows you to only do the type of work that you want to do. It's not what you want to hear necessarily, but it's the truth. Will Paxton, what's up, brother? Says, what experience do you have with the Tricomp plugin in Studio One? I've been attempting to use it, and it seems to make things sound good, but I can't figure out what exactly it's doing. I've not used it. I understand it's kind of like a multi-band compressor with like a single knob, but the few times I used it, I didn't like the sound, or I used it too aggressively, so I don't know what it does. My assumption is it's like a simpler version of like the multi-band compressor that doesn't give you nearly as much control, but might be cool. So yeah, I got nothing. I'm sorry. I should probably spend time with it. But you know. Joel Palenko says, is it dumb to get a tube mic instead of a FET-based because of noise in my home studio? I understand FET condensers are quieter. Dude, noise is not a problem. I don't know why people think noise is a problem. It really isn't. Some of my favorite records, even modern records, you can hear some noise from like the preamp, or what matters is what the tone is. If you give me two microphones and microphone number one sounds amazing on my voice, but it's a little noisy, and then microphone number 2 just sounds okay on my voice, but it's dead quiet, I'm going to go with microphone number 1, and I think you should too. So what really matters is what it sounds like. Now, can you get an amazing sound out of a FET condenser versus a tube? Yeah, totally. I don't have tube mics currently, but there's not really so much by choice. They just tend to be more expensive, and I don't tend to go there. But it's more just, what does the mic sound like, and is it a good addition to your mic locker given the different types of tones you're trying to get? But yeah, I've used tube mics in the past, and they can be some of the best things you use, but they're not the only option. But yeah, I would not let noise be a determining factor. I just don't care about noise, and I don't think you should either. Joe, do you have any, excuse me, do you have any formal music studies? Do you think it is better to have some, or just by experience we can learn? Any advice about the topic? That's from Jose. Jose, are you asking specifically about like audio and recording? Or are you talking more like specifically as a musician? Excuse me, I've had a little bit of both. I did get a degree in audio, and I minored in music. And I think those are valuable things. And I certainly am glad I did both of them. But if I were to do it again, like if my son, who's 7, in 10 years, he's thinking about what he wants to do for a career, if he's into music, and I hope he wants to, but I don't know if he will. But whatever he's into, my first inclination is going to be, is college even the right path for you? There's lots of good things about college, connections, life experience, all that stuff. But unless you're going to be like a doctor or a lawyer or things that require a specific degree to even do the job, more and more I feel like you can probably learn as much, if not more, and save yourself tens of thousands of dollars by studying under people who are doing the thing you want to do, especially in the creative world. I mean, that's why things like the Recording Revolution and Home Studio Corner exist, right? We offer essentially a lot of the same things you get from recording school, minus the big studio that you can go into and use. So if you have your own equipment, and then you take some of our courses to fill in the gaps of your knowledge, you can get pretty good. There are people who have done both, right? If there are successful people who have gone to college for it, then that is a great path. If there are people who have not gone to college and done it, then that's also a legitimate path. Both of those things exist, so you gotta kind of weigh which one makes more sense for you. But I think definitely learning from other people. You can learn a lot on your own, but you can't learn everything on your own. So you need someone to help you. I know it sounds like I'm pitching you need to study under my tutelage. I'm not saying that. Just someone who has been there and who knows more than you can offer you a lot. So don't discredit that. Don't get so caught up in the DIY of it that you don't allow other people to speak truth into what you're doing. And that's true not just in music. That's kind of true in life as well. And something I'm honestly can be pretty bad at sometimes. Daniel has a VIP-related question. Quick timeout. If you're not a VIP member and you like things like this podcast, you really should check it out. homestudiocorner.com/VIP. Just go. There's a free trial. Go see if it's for you. I think you'll like it. There's a lot of cool stuff coming up this year. Daniel says, pretty new, so not sure how it works nowadays, but do you still do the VIP mix critiques? I don't. And the reason is I used to do monthly where I sit down and listen to as many mixes and critique them. Did that for several years. But since we've transitioned into doing monthly challenges, I've taken that live stream that we do every month and I'm listening to the challenge submissions and offering critiques of those, sort of. So no, I don't do the monthly critique anymore, but I do offer critiques as a service, homestudiocorner.com/critiques. It's very affordable. If you want to have me listen to one of your tracks and give you my unbiased, hopefully not terribly too harsh, but honest feedback. What are your opinions on using a control surface versus using a mouse when mixing? Is it worth investing in real faders? Well, I've got this mixer here, and I've tested out the DAW mode that they came out with, which turns this mixer into control surface. I do like having the hands on the faders, but it's not a must-have. And I do a lot of what I do on a mouse anyway. So if it gets you excited, if it connects with you on like an emotional, creative level and it helps you, I think it's great. I wrote an article years ago about how control surfaces aren't really worth it because in a sense, it doesn't do anything for the audio. So there's no audio passing through your control surface, right? So moving that fader does not change the sound at all. But the other piece of that, the other side of that coin is if it helps you connect to the music better and gets you more excited to be in the studio working on it, which is legit, or if you just feel more creative and you're able to do better work because you got your hands on those faders, then go for it. I don't think one is better than the other. And of course, you can find examples of people who do it with both. People who only use a mouse, people who only mix through a mixer, and everything in between. And you just got to find what works for you. Control surfaces tend to be a lot of money. I will say, this thing right here, I don't know if you can see it, the PreSonus fader port, to me, is a great in-between. You're not having to spend like $1,000 on a big control surface with lots of faders. It's only, I mean, last I checked, it was $150, $200, and it's got one single great fader that will jump to whatever you have selected in your DAW, and then has other buttons for like transport control and things like that. So if you're really using it for like automation, writing a vocal, you really only need one fader anyway. If you really think you'll have your hands on multiple faders, then the bigger, multiple fader control surfaces might make sense. So there you go. I did not get this board for the control surface piece of it. It was nice that it's going to have that as a feature, but I didn't. And by the way, the fader port, according to Michael, is only $120 now, which is cool. They may be getting rid of it because now they have the fader port 8 and the fader port 16 they just talked about. So the old single fella might be going the way of the what? I don't even know what's the way of something that is expired. Expired isn't the word. Extinct is the word I was looking for. Any suggestions? This is from Mark. Any suggestions on reducing rack tom bleed into overhead mics using XY? Maybe it's just a loud tom. Man, I don't think it matters. You can move the overheads up and down, which will totally change the relationship of like how much cymbal and drums you're getting in a way that may not be expected. So play around with the height. But if you already have them recorded, to me, I go through different phases, but currently overheads for me are just giving me a picture of the kit, and I'm taking a lot of the low end and mid range out of my overheads anyway. So they're mostly like, for me, the upper mid range and high frequencies. So cymbals and like the upper parts of snare and toms and the sound of like the overall kit. So I'm getting a lot of the fullness both in the mid range and the low end in my mixes from the spot mics. So usually my toms are cranked, have a lot of low end and sound almost like mini kick drums. So any bleed that's in the overhead, it gets overwhelmed by the big tom in the mix, which maybe doesn't work all the time, but it works pretty well for me most of the time. Any chance PreSonus might reissue an updated fader port? I don't know. They've been redoing the bigger fader ports and releasing those. By the way, thank you to those who told me it is the dodo bird. That was the thing I was trying to say earlier. Thank you. Let's see. Kip Buckner says, I have at my disposal loops and a MIDI keyboard, but I have tons of plugins, waves and all for synths. Can I still get a quality product? My mixes seem lackluster. Thank you. So you're asking, you basically don't have any physical instruments. You have lots of plugins and virtual instruments. Can you make a quality product? Absolutely. Absolutely. And in a lot of ways, sometimes what you run into with virtual instruments is things can sound a little too perfect, because everything has been sampled so pristinely, and if you're doing it to like a grid and quantized, it can feel a little cold and stale. So not knowing what you mean by lackluster, is it the mix or is it the performance? Sometimes we think, oh, I can't get this mix to pop, when really it's the performance that's kind of boring. So the great thing about having virtual drums and virtual, all sorts of orchestral instruments and all of these things, what's great is we have access to really good sounds that even just a few decades ago, people in positions like you and me would not have access to without thousands of dollars to hire the musicians to play those things. So that's the good news. The bad news is, just because I have access to an orchestral sound doesn't mean I necessarily know how to write a part that works well for an orchestra. So you've got to balance the fact that you have these things with, you need to be a good steward of how those need to be performed. If you can't perform them well, or find someone who can, or do it in a way that works well for the song, then it doesn't matter that they sound good. So it's kind of that same old, I talk about getting it right at the source a lot. One big, huge piece of that source is the performance. So are you playing just boring parts? Maybe you need to play more interesting parts. Maybe you need to learn more and study more about like arrangement and things like that, that will inform your decisions of how you're gonna piece these pieces together in a way that's interesting before you ever start mixing. I'm out of time, I gotta go, bye!